Are the shambles or are the ruins in your life reminders of pain, of suffering and trauma, or are the memorials of victory and freedom? I don't really mean the physical walls or the physical shambles. I mean your plans. I mean your dreams. Neil challenged me to tell a bit more about my story, about who I am. And Belarus was a place where my life dramatically changed. One day, Marco, which is the guy that Neil is going to go to Armenia with, asked me when we first met them, said, "Come on, Sven, tell me something about you. Who are you?" And I felt quite challenged because I didn't know if I should tell my story from where I would love to tell the story or not. Because the Soviet Union, which Belarus was part of the story. I challenged myself and said, I will do it anyway. That might offend people, but I will just do it. And here's my story. I'm actually East German, if you didn't know that yet. I was 15 when the Berlin Wall came down. Many of you watched the TV and celebrated. For you, it was a very joyful event. For me, it turned my world upside down. You have to know, I was a child that grew up in a society that had no unemployment. I grew up in a society where, as a mum or dad or as parents, you could bring your child to childcare full-time, free of charge, from 6 weeks plus. I lived in a society where food was cheap, and nobody had to worry about that. If you think about communist countries like Poland, yes, they had struggles with food. In East Germany, we did not. Our shops were always full. I lived in a society where after-school clubs and sports clubs were also free. Where women were equal to men and very, very highly valued. Would you like to live in such a society? It was my dream to progress a society like this, to make it even more perfect. It was everything I knew. The wall, the Berlin Wall, was not built in my education to keep me in. The way I was educated, the Berlin Wall was built to keep you out. I had an enemy in my life. I had something to fight for, and I had something to fight against. And everything in my life made actually complete sense. My dad was a Socialist Party leader at the company he worked. And my mom was a primary school teacher who also led for a few years the youth movement, the pioneers and the free German youth, it's the translation of the youth movement we had. I had a career plan. I wanted to go to the army and become a software engineer, which basically planned at the age of 15, I had confirmation, everything was laid out. The next 30 years of my life were finally planned in front of me. Until, for me, the 10th of November, 1989. I wake up in the morning, my mum says, the wall is open. And when I say the wall, I always mean the Berlin Wall. Okay? And we never referred it as a Berlin Wall. It's the wall. And I said, like, Mom, no, never. She said, like, believe me, the wall is open. I said, like, Mom, I don't believe you. Turn on the TV, have a look. I did. I lived just 15 kilometers from the western border, or the border between East and West Germany, so I did not live in Berlin. But to see the pictures of people standing on the walls was quite a shock. On that day, my worldview was rendered a lie. The way I saw the world, the way I thought everything functions, was basically turned upside down. The teacher at school who was teaching us all about communism was standing in front of us and saying, well, that it would collapse one day was always clear. You don't do that to a 15-year-old. So my career plan became wobbly as well, and I knew it's very likely never going to happen. But that was not all. A few weeks or a few months, we don't know anymore how exactly, later my parents said, we have to talk. So they talked to me alone, without my brother. And they shared that, to make the story a bit condensed, that my granddad, on my dad's side, was in a so-called special camp, Buchenwald, which is actually one of the most famous concentration camps of Nazi Germany, which the Russians still operated till 1950. A piece of history that many historians don't know about. I've spoken to so many students who've studied history, they said, like, I've never heard that. The Russians had picked up just randomly people who they believed either were supporting of Nazi Germany or would be anti-establishing a communist society. My parents were threatened if they would ever tell that part of their life story to the children, the government would take the children away. So in order to keep the family unit together, this was a secret that my parents never told us about. For my parents, it was the worst thing ever that I considered to go to the army. And they did not know when would be a good point to tell me, because my brother was 4 years younger. He was 11. Anyway, what I learned out of this, I lost 3 things. Yeah? So my family was another one that I just didn't know anymore, really. So I lost 3 things: my worldview, my career plan, and my knowledge about who my parents are. I just told why. So suddenly, I was in a place of confusion. I did not know anything anymore. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know where to go. And so my journey basically is I had to learn 3 things. In '94, I walked into a cafe with a friend, not knowing what it was. Turned out it was a YMCA cafe. I walked through the door, and I remember my life changed. Something changed by walking through the door of the cafe. the people were really friendly, and it came out, of course, it was a Christian cafe, and that was kind of their way of trying to do outreach. So, over the next few months, I saw that Christianity helps people. I began to support it. I did not believe it. I was a youth leader, or a youth group leader, on one of the Christian camps. I evangelized. I told people about Jesus. I didn't believe it. I wanted to do good. That was it. Anyway, one day we had a big argument with the leadership. They were not happy with what I did, and I don't want to go too deep into this. I was very confused about what happened to this good culture of people suddenly. Why are they against what I was doing? And I was not doing anything against Christianity at that kind of point. But I was at a point of, I go home. So I sat down on a cross and was thinking if I leave the next day or not. And God spoke to me, Sven, everything is fine. My confusion gone in seconds. Just gone. Anyway, 2 years later, I tried to get rid of God. And I could not. It took me about 3 years to do that, to try to get rid of God. I couldn't get rid of God. Then I got baptized in the Spirit, and there was something, a key moment that happened there. I had supernatural experiences every single day for 3 months that I could not explain to anybody. I had nobody who had ever taught me about the Holy Spirit. It just happened every day. Now, I met a young pastor at the time who had told about my experiences, and he said like, oh, you know, Sven, when I was younger, I had the similar experiences, and then I went to the Bible college, and they told us that those things don't really exist anymore. I woke up. I've been indoctrinated all my life. Everything that I've ever believed was because somebody told me that. All my decisions were always based on what people told me. That was also the cause why I tried to get rid of God. I've never thought for myself. Really. Anyway, 2005, fast forward, I came here with my wife, just 3 weeks married. We meet Pete Ash, Taryn's and Kim's parents from one of the local church. And Pete became our mentor, and he said to us, how many arguments do you have in your marriage? That was one of the first questions he ever asked us. I said like, well, we have one really big one every week. And he said like, I think you guys don't have enough conflict. Frances, what? She didn't say it. But I'm sure it was in many heads. What? I want harmony. I don't want to have conflict. That was my thought as well. And then Pete started explaining and said like, you know, guys, you see conflict in a wrong way. You need to love conflict because it's our stepping stones where you get to know each other. These are the places where you learn to appreciate the differences between you, where you learn about the differences between the two of you. And they're important because the more you learn that, the more you can appreciate the difference, and you don't have to find always this kind of funny, no one wanna-be place of compromise. So I learned to love conflict, which turned out into learning to go love conflict, not just there, here, in there. And that was my salvation. In a sense of having met these people, having met and learned these two things, I went to Belarus as a person, and many people struggle very quickly with me when I start being very controversial, because I've learned to think for myself, and I challenge mindsets. I love doing that. Anyway, One of the things that happened last year, I gave a brief testimony in February. I just went into a very deep time of darkness in my emotions. I didn't know anything anymore. I just thought like, I don't know what's going on. And in the process, I met with Lynn. We sat down in the office, and she said, she just explained to me emotional logic. And while we were talking, I mentioned that maybe the fall of the Berlin Wall has something to do with that. But I didn't really have any emotions about that time at all. I only noticed I had no time, I didn't have any emotions. So I was very glad that that came up, because I started coming from, I've been protected by God, I've not been traumatized, to maybe I've been traumatized, to learning I've been traumatized. My life was a ruin. That's what that picture represents. My life was a ruin. It's gone. It's all broken down. Anyway, what happened in Belarus was, after I told my story and my testimony a bit more, we went away from, I think it was in Zlobin, and then we went back, and Valentina wanted to talk to me. And Neil didn't let her. But one day, she just took the chance, said like, Sven, I want to do something. I said, okay. She said like, I want to ask you for forgiveness what my nation did to your family. Now, if I would not like conflict, the coping mechanism I had immediately inside me was, and I want to ask you for forgiveness what the Germans did to yours. And I knew, no. This is a really weird place right now where I feel I should apologize to, but that's not the right thing to do. What I have to do right now is like, keep my breath and take what I've been given. I just looked at her and said, I'm not prepared right now. I was not prepared for anything like that. I just want to say thank you. And then emotions turned up. And I knew it's a gift I even have to take and carry to my parents and tell my parents about. Suddenly freedom turned up in my life that I've never known before. Suddenly, I felt like I could walk around and tell my story everywhere. I had a freedom to just go. And the amazing thing was I told my story then in Belarus in the leadership meeting as well as the church service in Babrusk. The amazing thing was I could suddenly say, guys, I know where you are. I know where you are with your thinking. I know that you always say no to things and it can't be done and it cannot be done. The government says you can't do this, the government says you can't do this, and the government says this is the way we should do it. I said, like, I know by experience where you are. Because I lived in a very similar country. But I'm also the testimony, it doesn't have to be like that. It took me a long journey, and I'm great that God did that. But God pulled me through this journey to the point of suddenly the pain and the walls and the ruins in my life became memorials that I could go and share and bring healing and mindset changes to people that I didn't know was ever possible. I didn't know. For me, the Berlin Wall, the idea was a historical fact. Until then. Suddenly God opened the world. I just knew, like, I'm a Belarus. I could bring healing to a whole nation by sharing my story. Actually, I can bring healing to your nation too. Because the question I have about the United Kingdom is, if you go to those memorials, if you go to all these ruins like Charles Cross, if you see them, what do you think? What are the emotions in your life? Are there the emotions of the war that took your dads? Of broken family? Or is there reconciliation? Your own reconciliation with that part of history, where we can walk forward together. We all live with our ruins in life. The question is, if you look at them and you see pain, or if you look at them and say, like, this is what gave me the story I have to tell. This is what makes me who I am today. This is what I have to pass on. I came back from Belarus, read a book very quickly, and I found my third jam. My core value. I read a book and it said, like, how you lead, or who you are, is how you lead. If you do not know what your core value is, you do not know why you make decisions the way you do. I don't know what my core value is. Next page, 100 values. The exercise was just go and circle all the values that you think are values in your life, and you will end up with about 10 to 15. But they're not your core values. They're just values that you like. Now the exercise is you go through them and you just delete them all until you turn up with 2. Once again, I had learned to love conflict. The trick. I went back into my life, into situations where I saw some of those values that I had encircled crumble or wobble, where they were not as secure as I thought they were. Values like loyalty, values like commitment. You know, I love them. Don't get me wrong, I really, really love them. But I've been in conflict situations with people where suddenly it's like, I would give this up easily. So I deleted all the ones that I would give up. I ended up with 1. Curiosity. Something that God put into my life through the fall of the Berlin Wall, when I had to learn to ask questions. And I question everything. Everything. But then I discovered later on I have another one, is faith. And they both are always together. They're inseparable from each other. What my faith does is gives me firm boundaries, good ones, around my curiosity, so I don't go mental. The boundaries that are in there are basically God is good, God is love, God is the creator. And there are questions these are statements I will never, ever question. But what my curiosity does to my faith is, I don't believe what the preacher says, just because he said it. I go and ask questions. I take my Bible and think like, does that make sense what he said? And that's where lots of my things come from, because I learned to ask questions. That's why I love studying the Bible. That's why I study the Bible the way I do. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of those conflicts I have with God, which I love conflict. But my encouragement to you is this. We all have these ruins in our lives. We all have these traumas in our lives. And we probably sometimes see them and we try to fix them. Do not fix them. My journey taught me one big thing. Don't try to fix the big things. Go one step at a time. Learn one thing at a time. If God presents something to you that doesn't seem to have any connection with your big problem, don't worry. Go for it. Because it's a lesson to learn. That lesson might not make any sense to you at the time, but eventually, if you move one step at a time, you will see your big problem be resolved on its own. I could not find my problem, okay? I didn't know I was traumatized. It wasn't there. But what I did was I just kept on learning. Just learning. I rejected education. I learned, for instance, that teaching is not learning. Being taught doesn't mean that you have learned. But those kind of small steps put little pieces into my life that enabled me to receive the gift. If I would have not loved conflict, I would have had something to say. If I would have not learned to think and challenge things, I probably wouldn't have stood up in Belarus even ever telling my story. And there are a lot of ruins in my life as well. Other ones. Like, I failed a church plant. I call the story today, I crashed the perfect team. Because personality-wise, we were the perfect team. But we had too many arguments with each other. Then I came to the Plymouth, because she's one of the team members. We came to Plymouth and we learned conflict. But without that experience, I would have never understood what Pete tried to teach me. There were so many other things I touched, I tried to do, and they all failed. And every time it failed. And that was the reason why I, in the end, stood there and thought, like, I can't cope anymore. I don't know what is going on. Everything I touch, everything falls apart. Every time. Yes, I learn things, but I'm fed up with things falling apart. Businesses, that was basically the thing that put me over last year was, I wanted to start a business with someone, and then I pulled out because I didn't see how this could work. And I was so fed up with everything. But God had a journey. And He had to conclude a journey. What my curiosity discovery did was I looked into my life. I saw conflicts with managers in businesses. Where they said, oh, Sven, you're not loyal. No, you're not really committed. No, you're not really with us here. And I thought, like, why is he saying this? I don't feel that. I'm feeling I'm completely in here. I give my heart, my life, my everything into this business. Why is he accusing me of not doing this? And then I understood. There were points where they said, like, Sven, you have to stop asking questions. You just have to do it. This is the way we do it. Okay? So stop asking questions. Just get on with it. That is against my core value. I will not stop asking questions. If I would have known that, I could have explained that. The conflict could have not necessarily been resolved, but could have been explained in a better way for both parties to deal with the situation in a different way. On the other hand, I thought I should have discovered my core value first. That would have made loads of things easier. I don't think so. God's wisdom is so amazing that He took me through all the pain without knowing my core value in order to get me learning loads of things, and then at the end say by the way, this is what is underlaying here. I want to challenge you. Don't try to solve the big problems. Don't go and try to rebuild the ruins. Reconciliation does something. It turns the scars of pain and suffering and trauma into marks of victory and freedom. The scars will not go away. And that's the Easter story. Jesus still carries the wounds. Our healing understanding we often have of everything is back to perfect, like in the video, that's really not the case. It is appreciating the shambles and knowing that these were part of God's journey. And these are the stepping stones and the values and everything that I learned to who I am today. These are the gems I collected. So what are the ruins in your life? And do you try to fix the ruins, the big things? And if you don't know the ruins, but you know there's something there, don't try to find them. It's one step at a time. And I want to encourage you to do just that. Learn what is right in front of you. Don't worry where that leads. God leads. He will get you there. It took 29 years of my journey, or 45 if you put my whole life together. I don't have a house. I don't have much cash in a bank. I don't own a car. What I do have is life. I love my life. I look back and say, wow. Thank you, Jesus, for this privilege to walk a journey with you. And Father, I want to ask you to speak to us today, to show us where we are struggling, where we possibly even avoid those conflicts that we should actually deal with and they are in front of us and we need to do something about them. But Father, I also pray that you will open the minds of every one of us so that we are willing to ask questions, that we question what we think, that we question what we've been told and taught, and that we are inspired to go on this journey with you of learning, not waiting for another solution, not reading the next book and trying to find the next answer, but to live with questions in our hearts and the willingness to walk the journey. Amen. So